Uldaman Legacy of Tyr returns as one of the dungeons for Mythic Plus in Season 4. The dungeon will start with a 35-minute timer, so as long as you complete the dungeon within that window, you will upgrade your key. Stone Vault Geomancers will cast Chain Lightning and Stone Spike. Chain Lightning will have the highest priority to be interrupted here, as it will cleave your group if stacked up close. Stone Spike is just an upfront burst of nature damage that you can stop if you have the spare kicks. Vicious Basilisks are the first tank buster we'll encounter, so watch out for their chomp ability. The dot from it stacks and can deal a considerable amount of damage to your tank, so be wary. You'll need to interrupt or purge the spiked carapace buff they put on themselves to avoid taking extra damage here. Hulking Berserkers will cast Diseased Bite on the highest threat target, so hopefully your tank. This will deal big upfront physical damage and slow the player by 30% for 1 minute with a disease debuff that can be dispelled. Berserkers will stun and deal huge damage to all enemies within 7 yards with their brutal slam, so move out from this. And finally, these mobs will also cast Reckless Rage once they hit 40% health, causing all their allies to inflict 20% increased damage, but also take 20% increased damage, so burst them down here. After defeating all of this trash, we are now ready to take on the first boss. You want to pay attention to Olaf's Ricocheting Shield. This ability will target random players dealing physical damage and will ricochet through your whole group if you're within 5 yards of each other, so stay spread. He'll also cast Defensive Bulwark, which you'll need to interrupt as it provides a 75% damage reduction for the remaining dwarves. While channeling this though, he doesn't do anything else. Eric the Swift will cast Skullcracker, inflicting big physical damage to players within 5 yards of the impact, so get away from the ground animation. He'll also cast Dagger Throw at random players, so healers should be prepared to top up these players quickly. Baylog will cast Wild Cleave on your tank, so they'll want to use some form of mitigation here, but also make sure to face him away from the party so that they don't get cleaved. During the fight, you'll also need to pay attention to his Heavy Arrow. It will fire in a straight line, damaging players struck and knocking them back. It always fires in the direction you are pointing the boss, so again, keep it away from your party here. Once they reach low health, they hop on their boat and fire cannons at nearby players. You'll want to stack with your group here and move slowly together to save space around the room, as they will keep painting the floor with their cannon, dealing massive fire damage if you get hit and leaving behind a burning pitch for 30 seconds. Every time they shoot, it will deal party-wide damage regardless if you're hit or not from the fiery surge, so healers, this is a good time to spend your healing cooldowns. During this encounter, you should focus down one of the dwarves, as the more dwarves that are present on the boat, the faster they fire the cannon, which in turn means much more party-wide damage, so decide on one dwarf to burst down here. Once you've defeated the dwarves, you'll be heading over to Bromach. There's only one new mob here, as it isn't a far trip to the next boss. Burly rock throwers will occasionally cast Throw Rock at the floor, which you must sidestep to avoid taking damage. Now we're on to Bromach. After a few seconds, he will cast Call of the Deep, summoning mobs we fought earlier in the dungeon. A Geomancer and ambushers will spawn. Tanks will need to quickly pick up these adds, and you'll need to kick the Geomancers so it runs into the pack, and then you can cleave them all down with the boss. The boss will cast Thundering Slam, which you'll need to move out of as quickly as you can, and when Bromach casts Quaking Totem, you'll want to instantly swap and nuke it. While the totem is active, your entire group will take nature damage every 2 seconds from Shocking Quake, so healers be prepared to heal here too. Once the totem is taken down, it will cause a tremor to stun all nearby trogs within 8 yards, so make sure you drag the mobs on top of the totem for this. This will also stun Bromach's Bloodlust cast, so he must be inside the circle. After defeating Bromach, we'll move through the dungeon towards Sentinel Talondras. You'll encounter Earthen Custodians that are going to cast a frontal cleave on your tank, which they'll need to face away from the rest of the group. These Earthen Custodians are joined by Refties. They will also apply a 9-second bleed on your tank through Jagged Bite, and they will also grant themselves an Ancient Power buff which increases their damage and haste by 10%, and this can stack. This makes them a priority kill target, otherwise your tank will fall over. Tanks will definitely need to kite these mobs. Now we're up to Sentinel Talondras. At the beginning of the fight, the boss will start with 2 stacks of Inexorable, granting her immunity to a stun effect for each charge, and she will gain more stacks during the fight. This is important because at 100 energy she will cast Titanic Empowerment, making her immune to CC and increasing her damage done by 50%. It's imperative that before she gets to 100 energy, you keep on top of clearing her remaining stacks of Inexorable with the resonating orbs around the room. Anyone, including the boss, getting hit by these orbs will be stunned for 6 seconds, so your team should avoid these and leave them for your tank to remove her stacks. At 100 energy, you'll need to stun her with the remaining orb to stop her finishing the Titanic Empowerment cast. However, after recovering from the stun or getting a cast off, she will also gain a 10% stacking damage buff for the rest of the fight, so you'll need to take this boss down quick. Talondras will occasionally cast Crushing Stomp during the fight, dealing big damage to your party and knocking them back, so be sure you're not going to fly into an orb here. She'll also blast an earthen shard at a target, causing them to bleed for 10 seconds, so make sure to use personal defensives here if you're targeted, and get your healers to top you up. Upon defeating this third boss, we're now ready to head towards Emberon. Here your group will face several new mobs, so here's how to deal with them. Earthen Weavers will spam cast Stone Bolt, which you'll want to interrupt, and you'll need to save a stun or hard CC for the Hail of Stone channel it does on a random player, or they'll probably get taken out. You'll need to interrupt or purge the Earthen Ward from the Warder. This is a massive absorb that will slow down your run considerably if it's constantly going off. But your main priority kick should be on the Curse of Stone. You can also decurse here if you have one, otherwise the player will get stunned and then erupt after 4 seconds, probably one-shotting them and anybody stood within it. Runic Protectors will cast Fissuring Slam, dealing big nature damage and leaving a pool on the ground that does damage to anybody stood within it. Move out of this ASAP. The mob will also cast Earthquake, dealing huge AoE damage to your whole group, so pop a personal defensive here and healers be prepared. Skittering Crawlers will pounce on random party members. Healers will want to keep your group healthy here so you don't get randomly one-shot. Their auto attacks also apply poisons to your tank for extra damage, so dispel this if your group can. Finally, the last important mob here is the Cavern Seeker. These bats will cast Sonic Burst that, if successful, will interrupt anybody casting and deal lethal damage to your group, so make sure you're interrupting this. Emberon. Once you start this boss, he will activate all the keepers, each of them spawning a Seeking Flame which you'll need to dodge. Periodically, he'll cast Unstable Embers which will target your whole group. You'll want to be spread for this mechanic, as the embers will form around all players for 4 seconds, and upon expiring will inflict big fire damage to all players within 7 yards. Here is a great time to use a personal defensive. Tanks should face the boss away at all times so his Searing Clap Frontal doesn't affect anyone else, and classes that are able to should dispel his Burning Heat buff when it's active. When the boss reaches maximum energy, he will enter the intermission phase of the fight. During this phase, you cannot attack the actual boss due to the fire barrier around him, and instead have to take down the 4 keepers around the room. Here you'll want to take out the keepers ASAP. This is because while the boss is channeling the rotating laser beam that you'll definitely want to dodge, he is also casting Fire Wave, releasing a wave of fire every 3 seconds, dealing substantial damage to your whole group. Healers will need to keep on top of the outgoing damage here. Now Emberon has been defeated, we are on our way to the final boss of Uldaman, but first you'll encounter some Ebonstone Golems. These are very important mobs that your healers should be prepared for. They only have one ability in Thunderous Clap, but it will deal massive damage to everyone within 30 yards. But if you can, make sure to line of sight this cast, as it will not affect you. Earthen Guardians will cast Blessing of Tyr. This is an uninterruptible cast that increases damage done of nearby allies by 20% and deals huge holy damage to your party. Tanks will need to kite the rest of the mobs away from the Guardian immediately to make this pull a hell of a lot easier. Also, tanks should be careful for the Bulwark Slam and use mitigation appropriately. Infinite Agents will Time Blade on the tank, dealing large upfront physical damage and slowing movement speed by 50% for 9 seconds. They will also cast Hasten, increasing their haste and movement speed by 30%, so make sure to kick or purge this if it goes through. The last mob you'll face in this dungeon is the Infinite Time Reaver. They apply a Stolen Time debuff that stacks. Every stack deals arcane damage and reduces your haste by 2%, and buffs their haste by the same amount. These debuffs are dispellable, but note that the debuffs are applied by an aura, so don't pull too many of these at once. Now we're finally onto the last boss, Chrono-Lord Deios. Periodically, the boss's energy will decay in ticks of 20, and upon reaching 0 energy, the rewind time flow intermission will begin for 12 seconds. Here, the boss restores its energy back to full and deals pulsing arcane damage to the group every 1 second. But during this phase, you'll want to stay in temporal zones, as this will grant you 30% haste until the puddle disappears. You need to clear as many of these puddles as you can before the intermission ends. Once the boss regenerates back up to 100 energy, the phase will end and the cycle will continue. Outside of the intermission, Deios will cast Eternity Orb, which you'll want to dodge, as it will spawn an Eternity Zone where it lands. These pulls will damage you and decrease your haste by 30%. Beware of Wing Buffets, this will knock your whole group back for huge physical damage. Be prepared with defensives here, and don't let this knock you back into an Eternity Zone. Deios has a frontal attack in Sand Breath, so tanks should face the boss away from the group at all times. And the boss will also cast Time Sink on 2 random players, reducing their movement speed by 35%, pulsing arcane damage, and upon expiring will trigger a time eruption, inflicting arcane damage to all players and leaving behind a pile of sand. Healers can dispel this, but you'll want to wait until the player is in a safe place to do so. But that's all you need to know for this encounter, and that wraps up Uldaman Legacy of Tyr in Mythic Plus. If this guide did help you or a friend out, then please feel free to drop a like down below and subscribe to your boy. And until next time, I'll catch you guys later.